The thunder overhead announced the coming rain as we collected ourselves post-fight, where I had requested a couple minutes to myself, which the others hesitantly agreed to. I deftly grabbed some supplies out of Sky's saddlebags before riding the elevator down to the lower level one last time. I wired up the few bricks of C4 that we had, purchased while in Ten Pony Tower, to make a makeshift timer, and attached it to the elevator call board, so that once I reached the top, the explosives would prime. Then, when the elevator got back down, they would blow up and seal this hellish place forever. The ground shook as I met back up with the others, sending looks of confusion around as I shook my head and smiled. Carlotta was finished strapping in, as I shoved the last of our spark batteries into the undercarriage of the Sky car. Brass and Pallet were already inside, waiting as I looked over the detached trunk of the Marauder sadly. Walking over to it, I grabbed the tire iron, which was really the only useful tool I could take, and placed it into my saddlebags before boarding up our cargo pod and latching the door shut. The first drops of rain spattered against the car when Whiny was finally back in sight. I stiffened up as I felt Brass stick me with another Med-X, immediately feeling the pain from my head and chest dissipate. He smiled as he levitated his helmet back on, slipping the empty needle into my bag. We did a circle around the 4 buildings to look for any signs of 42, which of course there were none. Just the lonely feeling about how permeated the small settlement was. We came in to a landing from the south and parked in between the 2 closest brick buildings. I opened the door slowly and peered out into the deserted center. Pallet gasped excitedly and burst out the door, bolting for a small teddy bear on the corner, which seemed out of place. I don't remember it being there from before. "Something's wrong," I said before the back of my eye stung, my brain now connecting the 2 points together from both my experiences in the bunkers and the video of her. My eyes seemed to sting whenever 42 or her likeness was near, which meant she had to be close. "42's here," I said loudly, before I slipped into Sats and pulled up the inventory, equipping Heartstopper before exiting the spell. The sleek shotgun appeared in my mouth, with a purple flash as Pallet grabbed the stuffed toy. Brass and Sky seemed to stare oddly at me after the firearm magically appeared, perplexed at the mention of 42. I'd have to explain it later, because I knew what was coming as I slid easily back into slats, while 42 bolted at the filly. Fuck. I was too slow. The 2% chance over every section of her body was too low of a chance for me to fire. If I missed, it might hit Pallet. I opened the inventory instead, and unequipped my shotgun, watching it flash away while dropping from Sats, letting time return to normal. 42 grabbed the filly in one hoof and pulled her close as she struggled, pointing her revolver at Pallet as she smirked. "You're a lot tougher than I give you credit for here, kid. Even though it's normal for the villain to look better needing an eye patch." Brass and Sky lowered themselves, getting ready for a shootout. I just pulled this trick 2 chapters ago. You won't shoot me. Not when I have her. Now, back off." Do as she says. As much as I had wanted them to shoot through me, I won't let them do it to Pallet. I ignored 42's infuriating randomness, curious as to why she was there. "What do you want, then?" I said with a stern voice, growing tired of having to play her stupid games. She seemed to stand for a moment, rubbing the barrel of her gun under her chin in thought. "It's not much, but the world will do for a start." She smiled and tightened her hold on Pallet. "Tell me the code you used to wake me, and I'll give you the filly. I won't blow the good ponies of Whiny up to smithereens by telling you where they are before the bombs I set go off." She looked immensely proud of herself as she spoke. "But wait, there's more." She paused for what I'm sure was supposed to be dramatic effect. "If you act now, I'll throw in the bonus of telling you where I'm headed next." She cackled loudly, seemingly amused. "No, I won't give you the code," I said with a painful stomp of my injured hoof, watching as Carlotta flew down a few feet behind her. 42 smiled and sighed. "Because your feather-brained friend behind me, and your refusal, you've lost 2 of the prizes. Only one remains. Tell me the code, and I'll let you save the nice ponies who lived here." She pulled the hammer on the revolver back as she spoke. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Sky shaking in rage. If I didn't do something soon, this was going to end badly for all of us. I had to make the call. "The code is 42, I said with a sigh. "It doesn't matter if she has the code. We'll just follow her wherever she goes and find a way to separate her from Pallet Jack." 42 choked back a soft laugh, thoroughly enjoying every moment she had us under her hoof. "Thank you, Backlash. You've been such a good sport about all these games. I'd say you've earned a bonus prize back." She started to walk towards the collapsed entrance of one of the brick buildings. "You see, not only am I going to tell you what I've hidden the ponies of Whiny in the factory behind you, I'm going to tell you where I'm going." She stepped through the broken brick hole and disappeared into the darkness of the interior of the building, still holding Pallet. "I'm going to find and pay a visit to the stallion I spent good money on to kill you. In my new wasteland, there won't be room for any failures like him." The engine of the Marauder roared to life as 42 shifted into drive and pulled out of the building, slowly driving away with her head out the window. "By the way, you have 15 minutes to disarm the bomb at the factory. I know you'll have a blast," she yelled back at us before speeding off in maniacal laughter. "I'll kill you, 42! You hear me?" I screamed and stomped at the soggy ground before my ears heard Sky's wings floof out. I didn't think as I reacted quickly, leaning over and biting down on her tail just in time, straining through the pain to hold her down as she tried to go after the pink mare. "Let me go! She has Pallet!" Sky screamed as she kicked me hard in my injured face, sending me sprawling to the ground in pain. She took off into the air before Carlotta slammed into her, pinning her to the third-story building next to us. She struggled and kicked as Carlotta hugged her tightly, relaxing and crying softly as I saw Sky's rage melt away. "We'll get her back." The normally gruff Griffin sounded like she had just been shot from the amount of pain of her words. "It will be all right." No, not we. I needed to get her back. I should have seen this coming, but due to my ineptitude, I've lost the one pony who couldn't protect herself. Even with all that, the last statement of 42 was running through my mind over and over, reminding me that we could still save the town's ponies. "Carlotta, we need to get to the factory. We need to save the others." I called up to the two flyers, knocking Brass out of his own thoughts, making him stiffen up before turning to me with a nod. "Get hooked up and let's get going. The faster we save them, the less catch-up we'll have to do for 42. The Griffin nodded and let go of Sky, drifting down and hooking herself up to the harness. Skyline wiped her eyes and flew in front of me. "I'll fly ahead and see if she has any surprises for us." I climbed into the Sky car as Sky took off into the air. Brass climbed in and stood in the open doorway, the rain starting to pick up slowly. "Fly over the roof. I'll search from the top down." Brass's voice called out as we lifted off, skimming low over the terrain as we raced for the imposing building. As it grew closer, I could make out a set of smokestacks and open-topped water tanks alongside it. The small, tan building seemed to melt into the browns and grays of the wasteland as we came over the top. I watched in amazement as Brass stepped out the door while we skimmed the rooftop, skidding on all fours before turning to head inside the roof access. Carlotta swung the car around to the front of the building, landing in the parking lot before going to unhook herself. I stopped her. "I need you to circle the building, in case we need you to meet us on the rooftop." She opened her beak to complain, but I was already slamming through the front doors, charging through the small gift shop inside. I skidded to a stop as I saw the flyer of a pink, shielded case in the corner. Quickly trotting up to it, I read the inscription on the empty case, thinking anything kept behind one of these has to be important. "Behold, the wondrous balefire egg. The good folks down at the Ministry of Arcane Sciences were so impressed by the amount of flavor we could pack into our crunchy little bites that they thought, why don't we do that? We proudly present the fruits of their labor, the balefire egg. All the destructive potential of a megaspell in a miniature scale. A true wonder of our time. Warning. Balefire eggs are not food and may cause death upon ingestion. Not a toy. Keep away from foals and small children, as it may pose a choking hazard and an increased risk of detonation. Not available for individual resale or private consumers. Oh, fuck. I looked up at the empty case for a moment and realized that I knew what 42 made her bomb out of, and I needed to tell the others we were sitting on a Celestia-damned megaspell. I turned and ran for the next door, plowing through the stand of souvenirs and a rack of 120-year-old moldy hats. As I tore into the manufacturing floor, I quickly noticed the elaborate catwalk system hanging 30 feet above my head. Not quite sure why every factory in pre-war Equestria needed so much literal oversight. Backlash! I heard brass boom from high above on one of the walkways. They're up here! I looked around for a way up, spotting a set of steep, winding, circular stairs heading to the catwalks. I galloped up them 2 stairs at a time, turning to meet Brass as he ran towards the offices at the other end of the factory. Our hooves slammed down the rusty walkway as it gave sharp groans in protest. Oh, please. Luna, let these hold. I said under my breath as the entire catwalk rocked side to side slowly. Brass hit the wooden door with enough force that it seemed to explode into splinters, the shards raining down on me as I heard the sharp twing of a tripwire snap as he broke it. The loudspeakers roared to life, with a series of small pops on the shop floor, small fires quickly spreading along the walls and windows on ground level. Hello, Backlash! The old foreman here was kind enough to have died with an audio log recorder in his hoof, and a stack of blank tapes next to him. How thoughtful can you get? Anyway, if you're hearing this, you have just triggered the short backup timer for my little Balefire Works presentation. I do hope you and the good ponies of Winey can make it out of here in time, because by this point, you have just over a minute and a half left. I really do wish you would stay and enjoy the show. I really want you to be a big part of it. I took a look at the far end of the room, finally noticing the bodies of the ponies of Winey. They were arranged in various positions around the table, seemingly frozen in ridiculous activities. Each of the 7 ponies had been executed by a shot to the back of the head. The grotesque scene made me feel like I was going to throw up again. I couldn't save them either. Backlash! We need to go! Now! Brass's anxious voice started, as he walked over to me and put a hoof on my shoulder. We can't do anything from the now. I'm sorry. But we need to leave. I nodded and headed out through the door, racing down the catwalk as the fires from below licked at my quickly beating hooves, heating the metal and burning me as I ran. The pain momentarily distracted me from the fact that I could only hear myself running, but didn't want to stop. So I turned my head and yelled out for Brass. As I reached the other end and sat by the stairs to the roof, I looked back as the fire rose up through the walkway, and to see Brass was charging at full speed down the red-hot catwalks. The heated metal stressed and buckled under him as he ran, plunging him into the fiery hell below. I panicked and called out for him. Oh, fuck! Brass! Where are you? I coughed and choked on the thick black smoke, straining my one good eye to look for him, but coming up empty. Brass! If you can hear me, get out of here! Brass! I wheezed and coughed harder as the flames rose to my section over the walkway, forcing me to run up to the open air of the rainy rooftop. I saw Carlotta coming around in a wide pass towards the factory, but she was too far away, and I knew there wasn't enough time. I galloped along the roof as fast as my injured hooves could take me, pushing every ounce out as they screamed in pain and protest. I hit the edge of the roof and pushed off hard, sailing through the air as the burning factory roof groaned out with a deep shudder and collapsed onto the production floor. I hit the slightly rainbow-tinged water of the nearest water tank, hard, sinking before I heard the deafening roar, feeling as the shockwave from the balefire egg ripped past the water tower and ripped it from its foundation. I felt the tower list before completely tipping over, sending the water and myself rushing out into the desert dirt. I coughed up a throatful of water and gasped for breath, looking over the rising green cloud, pouring up from the twisted remains of the factory. My pip-buck started clicking quickly as Carlotta and Sky came down beside me, My eyes clenched as I sat in the mud without Brass. I struggled to get to my hooves. He's not dead, I thought. He got out in time. He's just on the other side of the factory, or something. Sky and Carlotta were trying to talk to me, but I couldn't hear them. The voices of reason in my head drowning them out, as it told me that he was gone. I couldn't save any of them. 42 had managed to screw up every aspect of my life, save for my friends. But now, she just took brass tacks from me. She stole the embodiment of the innocence of pony kind from me. I wrestled against Carlotta and Sky as they tried to drag me back out of the mud. I screamed and flailed against them as hard as I could, but my body finally decided enough was enough and refused to move anymore. As they drug me, the rain into the Sky car, the world seemed to come back into focus a bit. They both bit down and ripped open packets of Radaway, each guzzling 3 of them down before passing 1 to me. I looked down at the rad meter on my pip buck, seeing the needle wavering halfway through the red, as it still clicked softly. I didn't want to, but I choked down the horrid, tangy liquid as I got back to my hooves. I'm so sorry. Brass... I quivered sadly as I spoke softly. He fell into the fire, and I lost track of him. I put my hooves up onto Skyline's shoulders. He must have gotten out. I know it. Sky's eyes streamed tears as she pulled me into a tight hug. Celestia, I'm so sorry. I looked up with water-filled eyes to see Carlotta's shocked gaze looking behind us. I pulled away from Sky and turned around to see a familiar power armor walking towards us slowly, shining a brilliant white with clouds forming behind it, looking like an armored angel as the figure walked closer. The rad meter on my arm ticked faster as he approached, a small dead bush he passed, lighting on fire. I reached out and quickly grabbed another Radaway, gulping it down. Fuck. His arm was bleeding, white-hot heat from the radiation he was giving off. Steam dripping up, with a soft hiss as the rain came down on him. Brass! Stay where you are! I yelled out, cutting through the silence. He stopped moving forward abruptly, canting his head slightly in confusion. Your suit's giving off absurd amounts of radiation. You need to stay back until you can cool it off a bit. He looked himself over before giving a small nod. Are you okay in there? Carlotta called over, her voice more curious than worried. He nodded vigorously, bringing a hoof up to flex it. Well, apparently while I was pinned over his loss, he was basking in the explosion because the suit could handle it. What a jerk. Yep, he's a ghoul. Carlotta spurted out abruptly, knocking me out of my own thoughts. Only way anyone survives that much radiation is to become a ghoul, which then reverses its effects. I turned slowly to her with one eyebrow raised. And how do you know this? I asked slowly. I should have known the answer, but I couldn't think because I was just being a dumb pony. It's not my fault. I was delirious from the trauma over the last 12 hours. That's the only reason, I swear. Because I did a few jobs protecting Ditsy Doo? You know, that's why she loaned me her Sky car. Carlotta said matter-of-factly. You could learn a lot from her. She knows a lot more about the wasteland than you think. A little bit about pretty much everything, at least. Regardless, Sky raised her voice at us. We're glad you're still with us, Brass. He nodded and sat back in the mud, making a large cloud of steam raise before hopping back up, turning and heading towards town. He's right, you know. We need to get inside before we become ghouls ourselves. Sky said as she jumped and took off after him. Carlotta gave a humph and hooked herself to the Sky car, waiting until I slammed the door shut before taking off. As we banked and headed into town, I stared at the brightly burning factory as the sun started to dip below the cloud cover, trying to remember the faces of the dead ponies inside. She had stolen 7 more. 7 more innocent souls, and the weight of them were firmly on my back, with the others from Ponyville. My body yelled and fought me as the last of my med-X wore off. the full brunt of the day finally weighing down on me. I closed my eyes for just a moment, listening to the wind as we flew. I swore I could hear the underlying tones of my mother's song, so I filled in the blanks in my head, slowly drifting away with the notes into the increasingly familiar darkness. I awoke softly in the sky car, opening my eyes and looking around. The sun had set and we were back on the roof of the building we'd spent the night on before. I swung the door open and stepped out slowly, wondering where my friends had gone. I called out for them, standing and waiting to hear their responses from the darkness, but nothing answered. I perked up when I heard a noise behind me. I spun around to meet the mutilated face of a green unicorn stallion, his right eye inside of his face torn off by the impact of something heavy. He stood silently as his lifeless other eye stared quietly into mine, making me back away in fright, bumping into something else behind me. I looked back to see the slack-jawed face of a green mare who seemed to be missing the top of her skull, and blood and brain had dripped down her face as she, too, stared with dead eyes at me, grabbing my foreleg so hard I thought she was going to break it. I screamed out for my friends to help me as a familiar blue Pegasus grabbed my arm, Pallet's dead father holding me out over the ledge of the roof, dangling me over the black nothing below that, as far as I knew, would surely devour my soul if I ever got a hold of it. The green stallion walked over with lifeless steps before stopping in front of me. He had no breath when he spoke out. "You killed us, Backlash. And you will kill more. Murderer." They let me go, dropping me into the wispy black darkness below. I reached out and yelled, not wanting to be taken completely as the darkness wrapped around me. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as I panicked in the snaked awake by skyline, hyperventilating and sweating profusely as my heart raced. "Are you all right? You were sleeping quietly the last few hours before you just started screaming." She stared down with eyes of a concerned sister. I could feel her body was tense with worry. I looked around for a moment, noticing that we were inside of the bottom floor of one of the brick buildings. A small fire lit in the corner where Carlotta was curled up in a bunk next to. "I'm fine. It's just the pain from my injuries," I said quickly, hoping that I lied through my teeth. This one was at least believable. Sky brushed my mane out of my good eye, before giving me a small frown. "You sure? We could talk about—" she started, before I pushed a hoof away with a soft smile. "I'm fine. Really, I am." I leaned forward and kissed her cheek, watching as it visibly relaxed her. "Besides, you should spend some more time with Carlotta. I think she really adores you." She blushed through her coat, somehow getting more red, while scrunching up her muzzle a bit before turning to look over at the sleeping griffin. "I think I really like her as well." She leaned forward and hugged me softly before floating back over, laying against Carlotta's side as the griffin put a talon around her. She smiled, and I turned to look out the window next to me. The storm was racing, which was nothing new for this time of year in the wasteland. The wind howled as I spotted a dark red figure pacing in the streets, wisps of steam still billowing off him as the wind and rain cooled his armor down. I wondered to myself for that moment when we would be able to get close enough for Brass to ride with us in the sky car. I flipped open my Pip-Buck's radio. The soothing tone of Sweetie Belle quickly filled the room as I stared off into the rain. I let the slow song seep into my aching flesh as I relaxed, trying to clear my mind of the nightmare from my sleep, but failed as the faces of the dead ponies flashed into my mind over and over. I couldn't stop it. I felt my heartbeat pick up as they whispered to me from the back of my mind, "Murderer, murderer, 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 murderer." I was about to scream again before I was pulled back to the real world by the voice of DJ Pone 3 coming over the radio. "That was Sweetie Belle, trying to remind you all that no matter how bad it gets, your friends will never let you down. Now onward to the news. First off, some upsetting news in the settlement of Winey has gone completely dark in the wake of our last report of the Pink Menace heading their way. There's no hoping
that they're all just hiding down below the floorboards and forgot to come back out again. My mind shot back to the factory's conference room, the residents each laid out as some sick joke 42 was playing. Their death's nothing more than a part of her game she was playing with me. A game I kept losing. Now for some alarming news. The Rock Gang had stepped up to raid on local settlements, seemingly in response to an act of humiliation towards their leader inside the ruins of Ponyville. So if you're trotting through the area, it might be best to keep your head down or gallop through as fast as you can, because they are on the warpath and shouldn't be taken lightly. Shit. Crankshaft really did run a gang. But I gave him his life back with the condition that he should stay away from us, and I didn't have any interest in stopping his gang. 42 was the only problem I had, and she was going to kill Crank. My mind raced between the pros and cons of this, ultimately figuring that if 42 only killed him, she gave a small army to command. Fuck. I was going to have to intervene, wasn't I? I groaned and slapped the floor. Lastly, I report to you that the scourge of that pink mare has once again been spotted heading east towards Ponyville again. More when I get it, but until then, you stay safe, my little pone. I clicked the radio off again, listening to the rain and the distant thunder booming in the night sky. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do anymore. I thought at first we needed a plan, but every plan I have is destroyed by 42 seemingly coming out of nowhere. By the time we got to Ponyville, I'll have figured something out. I got to my hooves and felt a familiar pain in my gut as I walked quietly to the door, slipping outside as Sky snored happily on Carlotta. I snuck around the side of the building quietly, and to the other side of the pile of rubble, splashing through puddles with as much grace as a steamroller. While I wound around through the skeletons of the demolished buildings, I cringed, hoping that it wouldn't attract brass. I ducked under the semi-intact roof and danced lightly on my feet before relieving myself over the edge of the dirt. My ear twitched as I thought I heard music for a moment, abruptly cutting out the heavy rainfall as I finished up. I sighed and checked my Pip-Buck's compass. A single pink bar appeared to it on my right. I leaned out of the half-collapsed house carefully, looking for whatever it was, when a small floating sphere appeared through the rain, the sprite bot bobbing softly as it headed for me silently. "Need something, Watcher?" I asked as it slowly floated inside, stopping next to me. "I wanted to see if you'd found what had become of the residents here. I'd been worried they'd been killed by Pinky." The bot abruptly cut itself off, floating for a moment in silence before continuing. "I mean, if the pink mare had gotten to him. 42 was just toying with me. She killed them and set me up to find some kind of joke," I said with a grimace. I don't care how many times I had that nightmare, even when I deserve it. But it would only ever be worth it if she was the one in the dreams. Her dead eyes staring at me as she threw me into the darkness. I would meet her like an old friend on the edge of that roof. If only I could kill her. 42? The Spritebot's voice sounded slightly puzzled amid the speaker's normal distortion. "That's her number. She was the 42nd clone of Pinky, I guess." I shrugged and silently remembered back to our first conversation. "What did you mean before? You said you knew it was a bad idea, which sounded to me like you knew something about all this. Are you a pre-war ghoul or something?" "Something like that." A cough came out of the mechanical Spritebot as it bounced softly in place. "I need to go. These things don't last." He was cut off by a burst of static. The loud clashing of a marching band sounded out before the bot bobbed through the doorway and off into the cold, wet night. I heard heavy stomps as Brass's armor splashed with a loud hiss as he walked over. "Just came out to take a leak," I called out as he drew close, stopping and backing up slowly as I exited back into the rain. My Pip-Buck slowly clicked as he stood maybe 10 feet away. At this rate, he'd be safe to be around in another day. And as much as I didn't want 42 to get that much of a head start, We all needed the rest anyway. My body felt like it was barely holding itself together as is. Look, Brass. When we were running, I started as he raised a hoof. He levitated a stick from the ground through his helmet and started to write in the mud. I knew the walkway wouldn't hold us both, so I waited to run until you were safely across. I stopped my hoof in the muck. No, it was my fault you fell. You should have gone first before the walkway heated up so much. Brass wiped the words away with his hoof before writing. I would have slowed you down if I went first. Then we both would have fallen. He pointed his point was solid. It was better one of us fell than both. Wait, what am I thinking? No, neither of us should have fallen. We shouldn't have even been there if I hadn't stood around for so damn long. Besides, once my armor cools, and I get some right away in me, I'll be right as rain. Wait, that hurt my brain. I had thought with all this knowledge about the Steel Rangers, he would know more about ghouls than even Carlotta seemed to. How much radiation did you absorb? I asked slowly as my wet mane stuck to my eye, causing me to wipe it away as Brass thought before writing in the mud. Well, the suit's rad meter is at the max, so it had to be under 1,000, though, or I'd be dead. I nearly fell over as I was reading the muddy message. I didn't know if it worried me more that he really didn't know about ghouls, or that he seemed oblivious to the fact it's literally the only way he could have survived that. I went to tell him, but was interrupted by a sharp scream filling my ears. Skyline was in trouble. In a moment, I bolted past Brass and was rounding the corner towards the door of a brick building, only to find Skyline's hoof slapped across my face. I stumbled in the mud as she knocked me off balance, angrily staring up at her as she turned to walk inside, the muffled voice of Carlotta coming through the rain to greet my ears. I told you, if you screamed the next time he gets away from you, he'll be back in 10 seconds flat. Now, hold up your end of the bargain, and do that thing you did last time that made me... The door slammed shut, and I latched as I sat confused in the puddle. Brass stood around the corner and tilted his head, wondering what that was all about. They just need some time alone, I said, as I shrugged and got to my hooves. Looks like I was spending the night in Ditsy Doo's sky car yet again. For it being so small, it was surprisingly cozy to sleep in. Not Marauder backseat cozy, but still more than you'd think it would be.